Okay, recording is on. So look, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the beginning of the 2021-90 PD series for teaching skills. And you'll have to bear with us a little bit. I think everyone's a little bit rusty. It's been obviously a tricky second half of the year for everybody, probably a tricky first half of the year. But we're just getting back into the swing of things. We have a few changes and we want obviously the next, the 10-week block of PD that we have for this series to be as engaging, rewarding, etc. as possible, keeping in mind that it's already November and I know where everyone's mind is heading at this time of the year. So with that in mind, allow me to make a few introductions at the start of the series. I am Lachlan Kalache from the Division of Learning and Teaching, and I am joined today by Bourke, Educational Designer Extraordinaire, also from DLT.
Morning, guys. Morning, everyone.
And I also have Michelle Wilkinson, Senior ED from the Division of Learning and Teaching. Also, Michelle might give us a wave.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Normally for this session, we'd also be joined by Beck Atchison, but she has been pulled into something else this morning. So it will be the three of us driving this train. And today's PD session is going to be looking at the idea of planning for teaching, certainly something that those of us working in the Division of Learning and Teaching talk about a lot, and certainly have academics asking us for ideas around or providing suggestions on how they'd like to do things. And the idea with this session particularly is that we come up with some practical solutions, outputs, tools that are already in place to help that process. And obviously to get as much feedback as we can with you guys as well. So we'd like you to come out of this with some options for planning for the next session, the one after that, etc. Hopefully I'm not blurry to everybody. I could make some comments about why I look blurry, Warwick, but I'll keep them to myself for the time being. Thank you. So first thing I want to show you is we have a little bit of a change in the way that we gather attendee information in all professional learning sessions. So look, what I'm going to drop into the chat is a link that I'd like you all to open momentarily, and that will open this form, a professional learning attendance form. And we'll start each of the session off with people just being able to drop their details into here quickly. You don't need to submit it or close it, just pop your details into there. And this is the way that not only at events like edX, but also in professional learning sessions week to week, we'll be able to capture accurately who within our schools and our divisions, etc., is coming to PD, and also an opportunity for you to provide feedback if you're so inclined. So there's a couple of questions in there, basically just on your email address, who you are, and which division and school. And then you can jump back into the Zoom room with the rest of us. So if you want to pop that in quickly, that would be great. And I will continue with outlining what today's session is going to be about. We're going to have a look at providing a bit of context around planning for teaching and why we're having these conversations, specifically in the CSU context, but also in light of the fact that certainly over the last couple of years, there has been a huge push to do more thinking about delivery for either online explicitly or face-to-face and online together. So the idea of hybrid delivery, perhaps, blended delivery, whatever terminology you'd like to use, and what that's prompted us to think about and to do. We're going to open up the online teaching plan tool, which is now available to everyone through the Professional Learning Hub. And I'll give everyone the link to that. Before I forget, however, allow me to also drop in the slides for today into the chat pod. So there's a PDF for the slides that I'm working off. So you've got your own copy. Michelle is going to take us for a casual stroll through the CSU subject delivery guide, and probably drop in a plug or two for her session that's happening on Thursday around preparing the grade center at the beginning of session, as these two things connect to one another in various ways. And also a little bit of conversation, time permitting, around where we're going next with this. So whilst we're looking at session planning, we're also trying to build planning tools that will help you deal with individual lessons or individual types of lessons. So for example, planning for an online meeting and what tools and strategies, etc., that might involve. So without further ado, we'll kick right into things with a bit of a scenario, and I'll just make this a bit bigger for you. All right, so new teaching session. We're right here, right now. Everyone's thinking about 90, if not 30 for next year for the proactive amongst us. Some of the things that we're faced with in our division is we can see obviously that there is a massive scope in the level of planning being undertaken by our teachers at the university prior to each session, ranging from exhaustive, incredible amounts of planning and time put in and rewriting of materials and plotting out week by week, lesson by lesson, all the way down to I'm going to wing it, or the person that gets dropped into a subject potentially after the session has even started without any planning being done. So there's everywhere in between, all shades of preparation that happens. We certainly see more of a problem crop up at times with sessional staff being dropped into subjects and not necessarily having a background in planning for teaching processes. And as I mentioned, people being dropped late into subjects. There's no guarantee necessarily that people have either background in teaching as such or a background in the tools that they're provided with. For a lot of you that have been here for quite some time now, I'm sure you have those competencies, those levels of confidence, or we certainly try and provide ongoing professional learning around them. But quite often we come across staff that don't have those, so you can't really take those for granted, particularly in the online context. And as a result, of course, the quality of our experiences, we can't really say that our learning and teaching experiences have a consistently benchmark level of quality. And that's something that's always raised. I'm sure you'd be familiar with slide decks that we have from senior leadership around quality teaching, quality learning and teaching experiences, etc., appearing in most strategic type documents about what the university would like to improve and like to focus on. What we're going to talk about today is potentially some ways that might contribute to making that happen over time. And questions raised about why we don't have a pragmatic planning process in place or formalized tools as such. Good news is that we have a couple and we're working on more. So that's what we're going to get into today. So first thing for us to do in this discussion before we open the tool itself is to get a little bit of feedback from yourselves. First thing I'd like to ask all of you to think about is your challenge points, pain points, if you will, when we come up to a new session. What are the things that consistently challenge you? Jed's dropped the link to the Menti into the chat pod, so click on that and we will have a look at the results as they come in. Each of these activities, I really only want to spend a minute or two getting some initial thoughts from you about, and I will bring that result window up for us to look at. Oh, there we go, second link. Okay, so wait for some of those to come in. Regular challenges that you face in preparing, in this case, for online delivery. So have a look, put in an eye. The first things that come to your mind, if you've got any in mind, Jed, by all means, drop them in there. Okay, thank you. We've got an early adopter in there, engagement, how that's going to happen. Turn it in. Yes, we're working on that one. That's a good one to put in there. Learning materials obviously crops up quite a lot, making sure that the subject site's in order. Timelines being too tight. Providing variety in the materials, absolutely. Give it another 20 seconds or so. Thank you, Amanda. Issues with Interact sites, absolutely. Obviously, in the background, at the moment, we have the notion that the university will be moving to a new learning management system by the end of 2023. And the process for transition across to that new system will be happening throughout 2023. So there's always, at the moment, whilst something we have aspirations in that regard, we're also limited by the fact that the number of changes we can make in how we do things currently, because we're probably going to get the answer that, well, we're moving to a new system, so maybe we can't make a lot of changes in the current space. Okay, assessments in the wrong tools, absolutely. Marking time, grade center, I'm sure will pop up there, and Michelle, as I said, Michelle will talk about that in her session on Thursday. All right, thank you very much for that. Let's talk now about communication specifically in our new subjects. And the reason I'm bringing some of these questions up is because the tool that we're going to put in front of you today breaks down the planning process into 3 categories: communication, content, and assessment. So that's where we're going with this. So the next question we have in there is about how you provide new information for students. Jed's provided the link to the voting portal. How do you provide new information to students? And I'll pop the results up. Okay, so we've got options in there about using I2, for example, the announcement tool. Do we give information to students in meetings? Do people use the send email function that's within Interact 2 itself, which targets your cohorts in the subject? New information via the discussion board? Do you use your own work email? Sometimes these results can be quite revealing for us because, sorry, I'm a bit croaky this morning. It shows kind of trends as well. For quite some time, a lot of people were using dynamic landing pages to give new information to students. That has phased out a little bit. Certainly the templates that we have for subject sites don't really have a dynamic front page as part of their design. But you can see that there are some consistent results in here, people using the announcement tool out to their cohort, etc. Now that information may seem obvious to you, but if we have someone that's just been dropped into a subject, for example, as a sessional, not really sure about their communication strategy for the subject, and looking for some hints in that regard, then these sorts of results might be quite revealing for them. So thank you very much for that. Next question around communication. We've just taken a snippet of some of the questions from the form, is around online meetings. So use of Zoom and your priorities in the use of Zoom meetings. So let's drop that link into the chat pod. And we will have a look at some of the strategies for those as they come in. What are your priorities in running Zoom meetings? What are you thinking about? What do you want them to achieve? Is it for presenting lectures, for example? Are you focusing on assessment, new information, covering old information, consolidating learning? Essentially, it may seem straightforward, but there are obviously a lot of different ways that we can use Zoom meetings, and everyone has different priorities in that regard. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Peter. The good news is that I'm hopeful that we will have the Zoom Mentimeter integration turned on over the coming weeks, the next week or two. Still hopeful that that's going to happen, which will allow us to open the activities inside the meeting room without jumping out and jumping back in again, which I'm definitely looking forward to in terms of the PD that we run. Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. I can't wait. There's been a little bit of a delay, but I'm still hopeful that that's going to happen. Okay, so we talked about priorities. This type of Menti activity obviously is re-ranking the votes that are coming in. We've had 2 so far, but as they come in, these will reorganize. But at the moment, assessment and problem solving at the top. When we have these results in at scale, when you get 100 people filling this out, for example, having a look at what these priorities look like for Zoom meetings is fascinating, because obviously some people have very strong feelings about whether or not a live meeting with students should be used for presenting old information that they could watch recordings on, for example, or using it for troubleshooting, problem solving, presenting kind of concept lecture type information, or the whole 60 minutes to focus on assessments, etc. It varies hugely, but the important part is that we're thinking about it and talking about it. So thank you very much for those. I will wait another 20 or 30 seconds. Jed or Michelle, do you want to weigh in on this one at all in terms of, from your point of view, prioritizing Zoom meetings?
I will quickly jump in. Sorry, there's another meeting going on here, guys, but I'll just say that, yeah, a lot of the questions and conversations we have with academics about Zoom meetings is having a plan around what you're going to do spent in that time. So having, chunks of activity versus chunks of you, delivering and being able to actually plan out what that experience looks like is a really critical part of the planning process.
Thanks, Jed. Michelle, from your point of view?
I think just having a clear purpose of what you're trying to achieve is just really important, and thinking about how it fits into that overall big picture. So thanks, Lachlan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly some of the conversations that I've had are usually from newer academics that are almost going week to week preparing kind of PowerPoint decks for their Zoom meetings. And that's kind of the strategy and thinking that they're, that they have going on is that what am I going to cover this week with the students? And it ends up being sort of a combination of sort of pseudo lecture, presenting information to students. And that's the platform that they're going to be doing it in. Also kind of covering announcements, other types of information, getting closer to assessment, having targeted assessment ones, but they're not necessarily having a planning process to do with online meeting strategy at the beginning of the session, thinking about the 12, 14 weeks, etc., what they're going to be doing. So thank you again for your feedback on that front. Okay, so we've looked at two elements of the online teaching plan process, communication and content, and a question or two from each of those areas. So moving right along, what we're actually looking at today is a tool called the Online Teaching Plan. It is available to all staff through the Professional Learning Hub, and I will provide you with the link to the Pro Learning Hub in just a second, but it is within your the slides for today as well. And it's meant to address what is a growing wish list for us. So if we have a look at the fact that people want a mechanism to support new teachers coming in, first-time teachers, helping them to get ready. Conversely, the idea that we have a tool to aid reflection and thinking about delivery. This doesn't have to be before a subject. It could certainly be filled out after the fact as well, thinking about how things were done. We're looking really at a way that isn't preachy, if you will, a non-intrusive way to get people thinking about the best way that the subject's either going to be delivered or how it was delivered previously. So again, reflection or a proactive activity, trying to identify problem areas before they occur. So specifically, when we're identifying tools that need to be used, strategies that need to be used as part of the plan, the idea is that this will prompt the teacher to look for help, either from colleagues, logging jobs with DLT, contacting IT, etc., to get those resolved before the problems crop up. So if you need assistance with things, we don't want it to be arduous. So in theory, filling out this process, I would argue, takes 15 to 20 minutes without kind of rushing through it. I think it can be done in that sort of period. I have seen people spend much longer on it because they wanted to provide a greater level of detail within the question set. And the reason that they were doing that was because at the end of using the online teaching planner, it will return an email to you with the artifact, the document itself of your online teaching plan, sends it back to you. Some teachers are taking those to their conversations with their heads of school, for example, as part of their EDRS. Maybe they're talking with subject conveners, etc., about thinking about delivery around subjects. And sometimes it's being suggested to other staff that they have a look at it to help with their own processes. So again, this idea of a structured planning tool, and as I mentioned down the bottom, it will give you an artifact, a document. At the end of that, it returns it to you as part of the process, which is part of the reason why it exists, is because you actually need something back rather than just filling out a form. Okay, so the actual online teaching planning tool for session delivery is kept at this link. And I will copy that link and drop it in the chat for you. As I mentioned, it is in the Professional Learning Hub. Thanks, Jed. It is in the Professional Learning Hub. If you're going looking for it after this and you ever can't find it, it lives within the Professional Learning Hub under Planning. And you will see under that tab that there is Online Teaching Plan Session. That's where the planner will open up. There's also a link there under Lesson, and that's being constructed at the moment. It's not ready yet. So to give you an indication of where that's going. All right. What this form does not do, what the Online Teaching Planner does not do, it doesn't replace our existing subject or course development processes and workflows that we have for getting work done on subjects. And Michelle and Jed certainly work in that space most of the time, and I'm sure they can attest to the fact that they have other channels for getting those done, and they, there are much longer lead times. So the idea of filling this out, really, predominantly, it's a tool for you, not for our division or other parts of the university. It doesn't provide an induction as such. It's not a replacement for a proper induction to the tools, systems, and processes we use, but it certainly might lead to some of those conversations if that information is lacking. And it certainly doesn't replace the need for mentoring or collaborative teaching in and amongst your colleagues at the school. Okay, let's have a look at the question set for the online teaching plan. I'm going to open it in the back end so we can have a look at those questions just briefly. I'm going to gloss over the question areas for you to think about. I'm certainly not going to fill it out here and now with you. There are 10 sections within the form. Apart from collecting your email, so it can send it back to you. It's going to look for your faculty, schools. These are the new school structures, so they're up to date. It's going to look for a subject code, the session that you're planning for, and the mode of delivery. Is it going to be internal, online, or a combination? Then it briefly asks for a reflection on whether or not you've taught the subject before. If you have, then it's going to prompt you to reflect on the last time I did, what were some of the key takeaways that you had from this subject, maybe something that worked, something that didn't work, and it asks for several of those. They're not mandatory apart from the first one. So if you've just got one thing that you remember, you can put that in. If there are multiple, the feature is there. If you have never taught it before, it will take you straight to the first element of the teaching planner, which is the communication strategy. It asks that question about how you provide new information to students, contact information, how you provide updates to students during the session. And that was one of the questions that we took out. It then looks at how you orient students to the subject or the subject site, if you do or you don't. Again, most of these questions are there as prompts for you to think about. Should I be doing it? Do I do it? What do I use to do it if I do? Use of the announcement tool, how you're going to use it, because we often get questions around frequency. How many is too many announcements? Sort of how long is a piece of string, really? But there are certainly opinions in and around that. This is simply to prompt you to think about that as part of your strategy. Will you be using an announcement template within your subject site? If you don't know what that is, then absolutely you can reach out and we can provide more information around that. Then we get into how we're using Zoom, your focus areas, primary, secondary focus areas, etc. Are you employing engagement strategies for your audience when you're using Zoom meetings? Or are they just listening to you, for example? So there's an option that says, I won't be using audience engagement strategies in my meeting. So, you know, it goes, as I said, it's meant to provide options in and around how you're doing things. Tools that you might be using during your online meeting. These are audience engagement tools, some built within Zoom, some external. Then we get into your content strategy. How's the core learning materials provided to students in the subject? This might prompt a rethink about how you want to reorganize some of the materials, for example. Supplementary materials for the subject. Do you have any? Would you add any of these yourself? Again, I won't be providing supplementary resources. The statement is right there. So you fill each of these out. Then we get into the notion of scaffolding delivery. And if you're intending to do that, and there are some suggestions and strategies around there that might prompt you thinking about doing those. Specifically, the question of lectures is raised here. If you're incorporating them into the subject, how they're delivered, and there are some different ideas around how lecture content might be provided. Then a couple of questions in and around the assessment strategy. So this is not getting into the nuts and bolts around your assessment types and what's involved in them. Obviously, that information and the planning prior to the subject outline tool being provision is longer. That's a longer conversation. But these questions are more around the scaffolding of assessment and how you intend to do it. So you might be thinking about hosting drop-in sessions before the assessment crops up. Are you going to have online meetings that focus just on the assessment? Are you going to create pre-recorded video, audio, etc.? There are a range of different strategies captured there. You can select multiple, or again, none. And then the idea of thinking about whether or not your assessment tasks are iterative. Do they connect one to the next to the next? That might not necessarily have bearing on your current session, but if you're planning for a future session coming up, and are going to have conversations with an educational designer, as one example, that's the type of conversation you might want to be thinking about. Are your assessment tasks siloed, or are they discrete, or do they inform one another, etc.? And then lastly, we get into questions around grading and feedback, and how students receive their feedback after tasks, etc. All right, so there are some questions there in and around strategies for providing feedback to students. And lastly, getting you to think very briefly about your confidence level in the grade center and setting it up to make sure it's ready to go at the start of the session. Arguably, if you've ticked the bottom option there that you're not confident at all with it, that's going to prompt some action from you. For example, you might attend Michelle's PD session on Thursday about setting up the grade center. So look, I haven't dug into any of those question types today. The form, the links for it, etc., are for you to look at and have a play with. You can submit as many of them as you like or as little, but the process is there to help you plan either for 90 or beyond. It's also fascinating for us because in the back end, we get data on the responses into the form submitted. So we can see faculty level, how many people are submitting online teaching plan forms. We also get a breakdown of the schools and their use of the tool. We get subject codes, we get sessions that are being planned for. You've got some people already in early planning for 22-30 as one example. We get a representation of the cohorts that people are planning for. So you can see massively their online planning. First timers versus people that have taught the subjects before, and then a collection of feedback on all of the results going into the form. And that will inform our own PD and our own practices as well. So this is an incredibly valuable tool for our division as well. So look, I would encourage you to take some time to have a look at the question set for the online teaching plan tool and give us your feedback on it. Absolutely. If it's missing areas and that you would like added to it, for example, or if you find that it's not particularly helpful or that it is particularly helpful, we want to hear about it. Absolutely. And at that point, we've just passed 10:30, so we're at the halfway point, which seems like a good time to just take a bead on the chat pod. Questions raised. Jed, Michelle, have we had anything coming in about what I've been covering, or people happy just to listen to my voice?
I think they're enjoying your dulcet tones this morning. Okay.
Excellent.
Right. I just made the point there that at this time of year, just as the session's wrapping up, it's also a useful tool to that real quick informal, hey, jump on and pop in some thoughts about what's just happened in the subject, and use it for that sort of reflective stuff as well. Secondary purpose, but a useful sort of process as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think probably a lot of the questions that people might have in and around this would be would only happen after they'd had a look at the form, to be honest, and had to play in that space. So I guess at this point, I'd also ask if any of you in the audience this morning have got questions or comments at this point. If you want to turn your mics on and direct things to us, by all means, feel free to do so. We're not precious about it at all.
I'd just make the other comment too. It's Peter. I'll just say this and then jump onto Peter's, but it's one of those tools that's really useful for making the practice and informs a conversation you might come and have with an ED anyway. You're probably getting a bit of a jump start on what the ED is sort of going to take you through if you do have that one-on-one conversation. So it's really useful for that kind of thing as well. A lot of the stuff that we do in our first meeting is getting people to think about this sort of stuff in the first place. So it's a really good tool for that as well.
Yeah, and Peter, just to your question in the chat about finding it again, absolutely. I got two answers to that. First and foremost, for now, as I said, it lives within the Professional Learning Hub, which is prolearning.csu.domains, which there are links to within the DLT website and also within the Staff Hub. And it's underneath the planning tab there. It's also going to be connected to in the new DLT website, and that project is wrapping up at the moment. Should be available in the first quarter of next year, is my understanding. So over the next couple of months, it'll be available. Adrian, you mean a link to it in DOMS, for example? I can put a DOMS entry in that links to the website. Would that be helpful? Just asking if there's a DOMS entry there. I'll assume, yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah, I can absolutely make a DOMS entry on the online teaching planner tool. That's a good suggestion. Okay, look, at that point, I'll move things along, and I'm going to actually hand over to Michelle Wilkinson, who is going to have a look at the other highly structured and formal tool that's available for you all to use to help you prepare for subject delivery, and that's the subject delivery guide. So Michelle, I'll take a back seat, and if you want me to do anything with these slides or hand over sharing or whatever, just let me know.
Thanks, Lachlan. That was wonderful. I would love to share if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to be here today. As Lachlan's explained, I'm going to talk about the subject delivery guide, but I am also going to get in a few little other plugs, as he mentioned. The first thing that probably I would like to speak to everyone about is the actual I2 help and support site, which stores the subject delivery guide. So I don't know, maybe a little thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't know if we can do thumbs down, but have many people in the room heard of the subject delivery guide or the I2 help and support site? I'm not seeing many thumbs, so all one. Thanks, Leanne. Okay, so that's good. That gives me an idea that possibly people may not have been here before. One of the easiest ways to get to the I2 help and support site is from this little button up here on your normal dashboard with the question mark help. And if we click on that link, it takes us here to the Interact 2 help. Now, this site is a CSU specific site to support academics with Blackboard. It doesn't have all the information on it because there are times when the information on the Blackboard site is sufficient and probably more accurate to support people. What we have tried to do is include information on highly used items and items that maybe need some CSU context or information to support them. To get around this site, the easiest way is, obviously, we've got some quick links here. So first and foremost, subject delivery guide, which I will talk about in a moment. And then some of those higher use items, as Lachlan was talking about, CSU replay, online meeting, grade centre, and for those who need to update their content. And this was quite relevant, and we'll probably update this link soon to the Blackboard storage changes. If you need something specific that's not on our quick links, there's two ways to come into the site. We can click on the support for academics and it gives you a nice left-hand nav. The other way, which probably is the simpler way, is to go to the A to Z resources. You, for example, might want some guidance on subject outline. So you S, and then it takes you to the subject outline tool. Some of the pages like this one have general information, and then it takes you off to a DIT or an additional page. So for this case, subject outline is a DIT tool, so it links you to the DIT subject outline tool. So hopefully though, if you do come into here, you can find the place that you need to be for some specific information. It tries to sort of set people up to support them. Obviously, there's a getting started for people who are new to Interact 2. There's other information about, for example, if you need to edit content, adding information to the content collection, and importantly for this time of year, really clear instructions on export import. So if you need to copy your subject over, there's some instructions here to support you to do that. We also have other information more specific. For example, if you're thinking about looking at your assessments, that you're sort of thinking, you've done the form that Lachlan's designed about teaching, you're thinking, oh, I'm wondering about a blog. There's a little bit of information here about the different types of blogs, and then information about how to set them up. So sort of those tools that are within Interact 2. Importantly, there's other information in about test pools and surveys. For example, a question we got asked quite frequently is the test access log, to see if a student accessed a test or so on, if there's a question about whether they dropped out and so on. So that's some really handy information there to go and have a look at. Obviously, assessments, we've got lots of links to other tools, for example, EASE, Norfolk, Quasar. If you just need that little bit of information, this might get you to where you need to go. So the idea is to be a bit of a repository to head you off in the right direction with the information you need. Now, the other thing that the i2 Help support contains is the subject delivery guide. The subject delivery guide is set up for 20, 21, 90, 30 and 60, so the main sessions. We haven't done lots of the in-between sessions because we would have a lot of pages. You could certainly use the one main guide though to give you an indication of the different things you need to do. Within the guide, as opposed to Lachlan's planning document, which is really set up to have you thinking about what you're going to do and how you're going to do your teaching, the guide's really a step-by-step going through about the things you need to do and check off to get to having your subject set up for the session you're leading into. So you can see here we've got it into pre-session, early weeks of session, and during end of session. It starts off, for example, with the Quasar form. And what people might find particularly helpful is then here it links off to all those sites. So we've got one really nice central place where there's links for all those things that you need. What we have done this session is also for those newcomers to CSU, we do love an acronym, we do love our own terminology. There is a little hover which explains the different terminology. So if you've come in, you're a new sessional and you're told that you need to do something with Quasar, and you've looked on the subject delivery guide and you're thinking, I don't even know what that is. There is some information included throughout just to help people go, yes, I remember what that is. This steps you through, as I said, different information. It gives you prompts to, for example, follow up on your textbook confirmation, review your assessments. Obviously, throughout, there's links. For example, if you need support with your textbook, we refer you to your faculty librarian. If you would like to review your assessments, we've got links to the SRS system so that you can get some educational design support. The dates that are included within the guide are guidelines, and they can be adjusted. It might be that your school or faculty has a different date, but certainly the activities that are within the guide, even if your school requires you to do a week later or a week earlier, these activities are things that are really important for you to do and have a look at. And in some cases, then, for example, if you know that you updated your readings last year, you might be perfectly fine and you might decide that this week you don't need to do your update your readings. As we go through, it takes you right through until the start of session when you're looking at creating your homepage and so on. An important step, I believe, an important step just towards the end of the session that we should have possibly done at the start of this week, end of last week, is having a look at the subject health check. And this is a bit of a summary, a bit of an overview of everything that should be in your site, ready for it to go out to students. For example, information on your landing page and so on. One thing that is a really good idea is to turn on your student preview and just have a flick through your subject, making sure that there's no formatting, things that have been, you thought you'd made available to students have been made available. So it's just a quick overview to have a look. Yep, everything's set up. So I highly recommend you have a look at that. Another thing included in the site, and as Lachlan said, I will do my little promotion for the PD we're having on Thursday, is information about Grade Centre. I know Grade Centre at this time of year, it can be quite problematic because you're getting Grade Centre health check issues sent to you that need to be resolved so you can get grade transfer completed. What we're suggesting is that at the start of session, if you have the time, have a look at your Grade Centre, make sure that everything's lined up, how you expect it to be, and then as you start entering grades throughout the session, things can be sorted. Information though is here, whether you're getting an email about your health check or at the start of session about, for example, hiding columns, removing duplicate columns, making sure that things are lined up with your subject outline. So there's certainly information there to support you. And sorry, that's some information on cloning an outline. So I am going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions, because I have just imparted a lot of information and different things within the I2 help and support site.
Can I use my audio?
Go ahead, Adrian.
Michelle, I found when I was doing the micro sessions that parts of the subject outline, like the coordinator information, that can't be changed by us and that has to go through HR or something. Can you just remind us what that process is?
For changing the subject outline?
Yeah, so there's a section at the top which talks about coordinate. There's things that we can and can't amend. And so, for example, someone's location, their extension number and things. And I was advised last year when we were doing the micro sessions that that has to go through HR, which was problematic because we have like 300 students might be ringing the wrong person. So the timing, there's a bit of an issue there. Just want to give a heads up to my colleagues really about that.
Yeah, and this is where I might refer to someone, because unfortunately subject outline, although it refers us off to the information, it's not an area that we particularly deal with, but others in the room, for example, I don't know, Warwick, if you have further information on if there's any way around that or if it just has to go through HR.
And so that's what we did with the School of Policing. So it was just really a heads up to say there were some things you couldn't change and some things we can't change.
Yep, definitely.
So
for sure.
I don't know if Warwick's got any view.
He might not at this moment.
Look, I'll just say as well, it might be worthwhile us following up on that anyway to see, we might be able to look at putting a document together around varying subject outline details and all the contact points that are required to do so.
Yeah, because we had someone who went sick, Lachlan, you see, so they weren't sure how to change it, but there was then the member of staff, professional staff nominated to then contact HR, so it seemed a bit clunky, but I'm just giving you a heads up on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks. And Warwick, I can see you there now. Have you got anything to add on this one, Warwick?
I just know it's a pain in the bum. Yeah.
Good. I could probably prepare a document that says that. Yeah, definitely. And look, we will follow it up and maybe we need to make that a little bit more prominent on the site. So thanks, Adrian, for that feedback. We can certainly add in if you need to do this, this is the direction you can take. So thanks for that. And so it was just mainly for updating staff members and so on. And
yeah, it's some fields that we cannot change and others you can. So
yep.
Can I just be greedy and just mention what's the relationship between Easts and the grade centre? Because sometimes if I have people drop in or drop out or removed, they don't always correlate, or should they? So I don't get told if a student is going, and then all of a sudden I may see something, a new code next to the name in the grade centre. I don't actually get told. So should East and the grade centre correlate? I suppose is my question. Might be one for Warwick.
I can answer a little bit. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be, I know there's been times when students have been removed from subjects and therefore their entire grade centre has been removed. And that isn't always, as I've found in my experience, communicated to the academics. So if DSS removes students and so on, they might just disappear out of your grade centre if that hasn't been communicated to you. In relation to East and grade centre, they should be connected. So if a student's in your subject, they should be in grade centre, and obviously then they'll have access to East. But Warwick, I'll hand over to you to add more to that.
I don't have any more to add. In fact, I agree that should be the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
They should correlate.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You'll see a history of removal when you go into East. You'll see those that were ever in there, and then they show as deleted, whereas you don't see the names at all in grade centre once they're gone.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks. Very interesting questions. Did anyone else have any other queries about the guide or the I2 help and support site or general I2 questions?
Just on a positive note, Michelle, because I've thrown a couple of low ballers, I think the cloning for such outline is brilliant. It's just so quick and easy. You know, the cloning tool just saves so much time. So
it is fantastic. Yeah, it's very good. It's certainly a good thing to have included. Okay, well, look, thank you, everyone. Certainly, if people have queries and would like to have a very, gentle overview of Grade Centre, I'm back on Thursday with a few colleagues to talk you through that. And certainly, Lachlan's amazing at putting all the recordings up on the hub if you're unable to make it and would just like to have a look as well. So I will stop talking for now and hand back to you, Lachlan. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I am aware that we're almost at time, folks, so we'll wrap this up shortly. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and I will start sharing my screen again, is the notion that we are also building towards planning tools that are at more micro level, if you will, to types of delivery. So one way of conceptualizing that, for example, is a lesson planning tool. I will make this a bit bigger. Which if you've, taught before in schools and other places, you may be familiar with lesson planning templates that certainly itemize aspects of your delivery and put timeframes next to each aspect and ask you to identify what the audience is doing, what you're doing, what tools you're using, what resources are available for planning beforehand, what outcomes you're trying to meet. They can certainly get very detailed. However, another school of thought in our context is that we have common types of delivery, such as planning for an online meeting, that might be worth developing a planning tool for, specifically just for that type of event, rather than a more generic sort of lesson plan as such. So we're certainly taking all feedback that we can on that at the moment. And some of the questions that we're thinking about is whether or not there's a facility to consider sequencing of different types of learning experiences and how that might sit within a planning tool. The importance of connecting prior learning to future learning within that planning tool. If there's going to identify an explicit relationship to assessments and or learning outcomes. That agency that I mentioned before, what's the audience doing? What are the students doing, the teachers doing at this point in time? And whether or not labeling that agency is of benefit when you're planning. If there are opportunities for active learning within the plan itself. And also obviously wanting people to be able to identify the resources they're going to be using to alleviate any kind of preparation or troubleshooting or problem that could have been avoided through the planning process. So look, Jed's dropped a link to the last Menti activity we have for today, which is just around your own feedback on things that you might like to see in a lesson planning type tool. Feel free to click on that and drop an idea or two in there as well. I'll open the results just here. See, I think I've left previous ideas in there as well. Yeah, okay, so people wanting to have an element of reflection built in. Obviously, the importance of scaffolding within the planning tool. What features would you like to see? Okay, so by all means, drop those in. All of these ideas are useful for us to put into the design of a lesson planning type tool. For example, tracking participation and how that's going to be handled. I don't know whether the planning tool would do that or whether the planning tool would identify how it's going to be done, but it's certainly a useful addition here. Large cohorts, how they're to be managed, etc. So you're getting really into classroom management or cohort management and engagement strategies as well. So these are all fantastic ideas, and we certainly welcome any other additions that you have to add into this space. You can click on in the slide deck that I've provided, and we'll drop it again into the chat before we finish. You can certainly click on the results link here yourself at any point and have a look at some of that other feedback that's been provided. And we welcome you to do that. All right, so before we say goodbye, I would remind you that the attendee and feedback link that we've got people to drop their details into at the start, and I'll drop it in again into the chat for those that weren't here. If you wanted to just finish submitting that, it would be greatly appreciated. And as Michelle mentioned before, she's running a session on Thursday on setting up the Grade Centre. We'll plug it one more time, so do come along and you can see her do her thing with some of the more knowledgeable folks from DIT, particularly in setting up the technical elements of the Grade Centre as well. So I do heartily recommend that one. Otherwise, have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you in the rest of the sessions for 2021-90 preparation. Thanks, folks, and have a great week.